I turned 63 in October, and nobody remembered. Not nobody, exactly. My sister called from Tucson around 7 in the evening, after the sun had already gone down and the house had been quiet for hours. She sang half of Happy Birthday in that off-key way she's always had, laughed at herself, asked if I was doing anything special. I told her I'd grilled a couple of pork chops. She said that sounded nice. We talked for maybe 12 minutes, and then she had to go because her husband needed the phone. That was it. My wife was in the living room when I came back inside from the grill. She was watching one of her shows. She didn't look up. I ate alone at the kitchen table. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not telling you this story because I'm bitter. I'm 63 years old. I've lived long enough to know the difference between a man who has a right to be angry and a man who just never learned how to say enough. For a long time, I was the second kind. I thought patience was the same thing as love. I thought if I just kept showing up, kept paying, kept not complaining, eventually the people in my house would look at me and see what I was worth. They never did. But let me start from the beginning. I met my wife, I'll call her Diane, at a neighborhood cookout in the summer of 2009. I was 50, recently retired from 26 years working for a mid-sized engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio. I had a pension, a paid-off house, and too much quiet. My first wife had passed from ovarian cancer 4 years before, and I had spent those 4 years learning how to cook for one, how to sleep on one side of a bed, how to stop buying two of everything at the grocery store. Diane was 44. She had a son from her first marriage. I'll call him Travis, who was 17 at the time. Her ex-husband, a man named Gary, had moved to Pittsburgh and was somewhere between unreliable and invisible when it came to parenting. Diane had done most of it alone, and she carried herself like a woman who had learned not to ask for help, because asking only led to disappointment. I admired that about her. I should have thought more carefully about what it would mean to live with it. We dated for 2 years. I was careful. I liked Diane. Genuinely liked her. The way she organized her bookshelf by color, the way she made coffee so strong you could almost chew it, the way she laughed at her own jokes before she'd even finished telling them. Travis was a teenager, which meant he was mostly indifferent to me, but he wasn't hostile. He said hello when I came over. He occasionally sat at the table when Diane and I had dinner. I thought things were fine. We got married in April of 2011 at the county courthouse, just the two of us, and my sister and Diane's friend from work. Travis didn't come. Diane said he had a track meet. I found out 3 months later that the track meet had been the previous Saturday. He just hadn't wanted to be there. I told myself it didn't matter. He was 18. He was figuring things out. We moved into my house. My house, the one I'd bought with my first wife in 1987, the one where I'd painted every room, replaced the roof in 2003, built the back deck with my own hands over 2 summers. I didn't think much about the fact that it was mine and not ours. It didn't feel important at the time. Travis moved in too. Diane said he'd be off to college in a year, that it was just temporary, that it would be good for him to have some stability. She said that word, stability. And I understood what she meant. She meant money. She meant a house with heat that worked and a refrigerator that was full. She meant someone who would stay. I was fine with that. I have never been a man who needed to be thanked, but I want to tell you about the summer of 2012, because that was when I first understood what kind of arrangement I'd actually signed up for. Travis had decided not to go to the state school where he'd been accepted. He wanted to go to a private college in Vermont, a small liberal arts school that cost, at the time, around $48,000 a year. His father, Gary, had no money, or said he didn't. Diane had been a dental hygienist for 20 years and had savings, but not that kind of savings. She brought it up at dinner one night in June, very casually, the way people bring up things they've already decided but want you to feel like you're being consulted. She said she thought it would mean so much to Travis to have this opportunity. She said he'd worked so hard. She said the financial aid package was decent. They were only about $22,000 short per year. I asked what the plan was. She looked at me, not unkindly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already done the math. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about my pension, about the money I'd saved, about the fact that Travis had never called me anything other than my first name, had never asked how my day was, had never once said thank you for dinner, or thank you for the groceries, or thank you for anything. I thought about all of that, and then I wrote the check anyway. Because I wanted to be the kind of man who did that. Because I thought it might change something. It didn't change anything. Travis left for Vermont that August and came home at Thanksgiving and Christmas. He was polite in the way that people are polite to strangers in an elevator. He talked to his mother about his classes, his friends, a girl he was seeing. He talked to me about the weather sometimes. Once he asked if the Buckeyes had won on Saturday. That was as close as we ever got to a real conversation during those 4 years. I paid. Every semester I wrote a check or made a transfer. Diane managed the logistics, the tuition portal, the payment deadlines, the emails from the bursar's office. I just provided the money. I didn't mind exactly, but there was something hollow about it. I was funding a life that I wasn't part of. Travis graduated in 2016 with a degree in communications. Gary flew in from Pittsburgh for the ceremony. I did not go. Diane didn't ask me to come, and I didn't offer. I'm not sure which of us should have done something different there. That fall, Travis moved back in with us. He said it was temporary. He was job hunting. The market was tough. He just needed a few months. The few months became a year. Then 2 years. He was 25, 26 years old, sleeping in his old bedroom, eating the food I bought, using the utilities I paid for. He had a part-time job at a sporting goods store, but spent most of his money on going out with his friends. He contributed nothing to the household. I don't mean that resentfully. I mean it as a plain fact. He paid no rent, bought no groceries, did not mow the lawn or take out the trash or fix anything that broke. I talked to Diane about it. More than once. The first time, she said he was still getting on his feet, and I should be patient. The second time, she said I didn't understand how hard the job market was for young people today, and that I was being unsympathetic. The third time, she cried. Not loud crying. Just the kind where her eyes fill up, and she looks away and suddenly you're the one who has done something wrong. After that, I stopped bringing it up. I want you to understand what the years look like from inside. They didn't look dramatic. They looked ordinary. They looked like every morning I made coffee, and Travis came downstairs at 10:30 and poured himself a cup without saying good morning. They looked like every weekend Diane and Travis watched football together on the couch, and I sat in the kitchen reading, because the living room always felt like their room and not mine. They looked like every holiday dinner where Gary, the ex-husband, the disappeared father, was mentioned fondly while I sat at the head of a table in my own house, feeling like a guest. Gary had a habit of calling Travis on Sunday evenings. Long calls, an hour sometimes. I hear Travis laughing in the hallway, louder than he ever laughed with me. Once I heard him say, "Yeah, well, Ray paid for it." "My name," said the way he'd mention a bank, and then he lowered his voice. I went to bed early that night. By 2019, Travis was 27 and still living with us. He had a better job by then, something in marketing at a small company downtown. He was making decent money. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to move out, certainly. Enough to start a life somewhere. He didn't move out. I started doing a quiet accounting. Not obsessively, not with resentment, but just because I wanted to understand what I'd actually given. The college tuition over 4 years had been roughly $90,000, accounting for some merit aid. The grocery bills over the years, Travis had been home. I estimated maybe $12,000 total. The utilities, the insurance on Diane's car, the dental work Travis had done when he was between jobs and didn't have coverage. Little things that added up. I didn't tell anyone I'd done this. I just knew. The birthday was in October of 2020, my 63rd. I'd mentioned it to Diane 2 weeks before, not asking for anything specific. Just mentioned it the way you do. She said, "Of course, we'll do something nice." I said that sounded good. The week of my birthday, she and Travis made plans. Not with me, with Gary. He'd retired and moved to Scottsdale, and apparently he'd invited them to visit. They left on the Thursday before my birthday, which was a Sunday. I found out they were going on the Tuesday before, when Diane mentioned it at dinner like she was telling me about a change in the weather. I asked about my birthday. She said they'd be back Monday evening, we could celebrate then. She meant she'd forgotten, or she hadn't forgotten, but it hadn't seemed important enough to rearrange. I'm not sure which is worse. They left Thursday morning. I drove Diane to the airport. Travis drove separately. I'm not sure why, and I hugged her at the curb and she said she'd text me when they landed. She did text me. She sent a picture of their gate at the airport. Nothing else. I spent Thursday doing yard work. Friday, I went to the hardware store and bought supplies to fix a leak in the basement. Saturday, I drove to a diner I used to go to with my first wife, just a regular place with good pie. And I had a Reuben sandwich and read the newspaper and sat there for a long time without being anywhere in particular. Sunday was my birthday. I woke up at 6:15 the way I always do. I made coffee. I let the dog out. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a pair of cardinals in the backyard, one red, one brown, and I thought about getting older and about my first wife and about what I'd expected my life to look like at 63. My phone buzzed. It was a birthday notification from Facebook. Then another one, an automated message from my bank. Happy birthday from First Federal. That was it. Diane texted at around 11. She sent a smiley face and said, Happy Bay. Aikwesh, we're at a brunch thing. Call you later. She didn't call later. Travis did not text. I sat in my house, the one I'd owned for 33 years, the one I'd paid every mortgage payment on, the one I'd fixed and painted and tended for decades, and I understood something very clearly. I had made myself invisible, not all at once, not dramatically, but one accommodation at a time, one swallowed complaint at a time, one check written and one room seated, and one birthday ignored at a time. I had been so committed to being the steady one, the provider, the man who didn't need anything, that I had actually become a man who got nothing. And the strange thing, the thing I didn't expect, was that I wasn't angry. I was clear. I went to my desk. I have an old roll-top desk in the spare bedroom, the kind with 100 small compartments where I keep papers and files. I opened the bottom left drawer and took out a folder I'd started keeping 2 years before. After that Sunday night when I heard Travis say my name on the phone, the folder had account statements, insurance documents, the deed to the house, notes I'd made. I made some phone calls on Monday. My first call was to my attorney. She's been my attorney for 15 years. A sharp woman named Linda in Powell, Ohio, who has never once told me something I wanted to hear, which is exactly why I trust her. I told her what I wanted to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How long have you been thinking about this? I said, 2 years at least. She said, Then let's do it right. My second call was to my financial advisor. I had a pension from my engineering firm, a 401k. I'd rolled over into an IRA and some investment accounts. I wanted to understand what was mine, what was ours, and what I could move before anything became complicated. I'm not going to tell you every detail of what I did in those weeks. But I'll tell you it was careful, and it was legal. And when Linda said I was ready, I was ready. Diane and Travis came home on the Monday after my birthday as planned. I'd made dinner, pot roast, her favorite, because I didn't want the night to be a confrontation. I wanted it to be a door closing quietly. Diane said the trip had been wonderful. She said Gary's new place in Scottsdale had a pool. Travis said very little, which was normal. After dinner, she hugged me and said she was sorry about my birthday, that she'd make it up to me, that we'd go somewhere nice this spring. I said that sounded fine. I want to tell you what happened the following February. I sat down with Diane on a Sunday evening after dinner. I had a folder in front of me. I told her I wanted to talk. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and something in my face must have told her this was serious, because she didn't reach for her phone. I told her I'd been doing a lot of thinking. I told her that for nearly 10 years I had tried to be a good partner, a good provider, and a steady presence, and that I believed I had been all of those things. I told her I had paid for Travis's college, supported him in our home for 5 years beyond that, and built a life that was comfortable for all of us. And then I told her that I didn't feel like a husband in this house. I felt like a utility. She started to say something. I held up my hand, gently, not rudely, and I said I wasn't finished. I told her that I had already spoken to an attorney, that I had already begun the legal process, that I wasn't asking for a fight, and I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just needed to live the rest of my life differently. She was very still. She asked if I was serious. I said yes. She asked if there was someone else. I almost laughed. I said, No, Diane, there's nobody else. There never has been. That's sort of the whole point. She cried. Real tears this time, not the kind that are meant to redirect. I sat with her. I brought her a glass of water. I didn't take anything back. Travis found out a few days later. I don't know exactly what Diane told him, but he came to find me in the garage on a Saturday morning while I was organizing some tools. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and I could see he was working himself up to something. He said he thought I was being unfair to his mother. I looked at him for a long moment. He was 28 years old. He was standing in my garage, in my house, on my property, telling me that I was being unfair. I said, "Travis, I paid for 4 years of your college education. I housed you for 5 years after that. I have never once asked you for a thank you, and you have never once offered one. I wish you well. I genuinely do. But I think you should talk to your father about fairness." He didn't have anything to say to that. He went back inside. Gary called me 2 weeks later. I'll give him credit. He called me directly. He said he didn't want things to be ugly. I said he didn't want things to be ugly. I said, neither did I. He said he hoped Diane would be okay. I said I hope so too. That was the whole conversation. The divorce was finalized in the fall of 2021. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Since I had brought the house and most of the assets into the marriage, and since Linda knew what she was doing, the division was not what Diane had hoped for. She received a fair settlement. She did not receive the house. Travis moved out in March. He found an apartment with a friend from work. I don't know if he chose to leave or if Diane's new situation made it necessary. I didn't ask. I stayed in my house. I want to tell you what October looked like this year. I turned 64. My sister called, same as always, same off-key singing. But my neighbor Dale, a retired school teacher who moved in 3 years ago, knocked on my door in the afternoon with a 6-pack of craft beer and a bag of pretzels and said he thought I might want some company. We sat on the back deck until dark, watching the leaves come down, talking about nothing in particular. My dog, a beagle mix named Chester, fell asleep on my feet. The cardinals were back in the yard. I thought about what I'd lost. I'd lost a marriage. I'd lost the idea I'd had of what my older years were going to look like. The version where there was someone across the breakfast table. That's a real loss. I don't want to minimize it. But I also thought about what I'd found, or found again. My house was quiet in a way that felt like mine. I cooked what I wanted for dinner. I read in the living room. I used the good chair. Nobody came downstairs at 10:30 and poured coffee without saying good morning. Nobody made me feel, in the small, constant ways that are harder to explain than they are to feel, that I was furniture. I've had a few people ask me, since all of this happened, why I stayed as long as I did. I've thought about it a lot. I think I stayed because I confused loyalty with love. I think I stayed because I was afraid of what it would mean about me if I left. Afraid I'd look like someone who gave up, someone who failed the second time. I think I stayed because every time I came close to saying something real, someone cried or changed the subject, or I told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was being too sensitive, that this was just what long marriages looked like. I think I also stayed because I genuinely cared about Diane, even at the end. Caring about someone is not the same as being treated well by them. I know that now, in a way I didn't know it at 50. If you're somewhere in the middle of a situation like this, not at the beginning, not at the end, just somewhere in the long, quiet middle, I want to tell you something. The patience you're offering is only a virtue if the other person can see it. If they can't see it, or won't, it's not patience. It's just loss. You can decide what to do with that. I'm not here to tell you what I should have done differently. Maybe I should have spoken up earlier. Maybe I should have never written that first check for Travis's tuition. Maybe I should have been louder about what I needed earlier, more consistently. Maybe. But I'll tell you this. On the morning after Diane moved out, I woke up at 6:15 like always, made my coffee, let Chester have into the backyard. The sun was coming up over the fence line, turning everything that low orange color that only happens in Ohio in the fall. And I stood at the window, the same window where I'd watched the Cardinals on my 63rd birthday, alone and forgotten. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I was in my own life, not hovering at the edge of someone else's, not funding someone else's story, not waiting for someone to notice I was there, just in it, fully. My house, my coffee, my dog, my morning. Some people might call what I did giving up. I understand why. I call it finally showing up for myself. After years of showing up for everyone else and getting a smiley face emoji in return. Chester is snoring right now. There's a pot of soup on the stove. I've got a book I've been meaning to finish for 3 months, and tonight I'm going to finish it. That's enough. That's more than enough. It took me 63 years to learn that. I've had a lot of time to think about how things like this happen. Not the big moments, the birthday, the empty house, the text with a cake emoji, but the small ones. The 100 small ones that came before. Because that's how it actually works. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to become invisible in their own life. It happens in increments. You swallow one thing and it goes down easier than you expected. So the next time you swallow something a little bitter, and then one day you're 63 years old eating leftover pot roast alone on your birthday, and you realize you trained the people around you to treat you exactly this way, not because they were monsters, because you kept showing them it was acceptable. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with, my own role in it. It would have been easier to make Diane the villain, to make Travis the ungrateful kid, to make Gary the shadow that never really left. And those things were all true, in their way. But the truth underneath all of it was that I had made choices consistently for years that said my needs were negotiable, that my comfort could wait, that my presence was a resource to be drawn from rather than a life to be shared. When I paid Travis's tuition the first time, I told myself I was being generous. And I was. But I was also buying a version of acceptance I never actually received. That's not generosity anymore. That's a transaction that only one side knew was happening, and those never end well for the person who doesn't say what they actually want. I think about Ray, about myself at 50, at 55, at 60, and I see a man who genuinely believed that if he just held on long enough, if he just kept the house warm and the bills paid and his complaints to himself, something would shift, that one day Diane would look at him across the dinner table and see everything he'd been carrying. That Travis would come downstairs one morning and say thank you. I was waiting for a recognition that was never coming because I had never made it clear that I needed it. That's not a character flaw. It's something a lot of people do, especially those of us who are raised to believe that asking for things is a kind of weakness. But there's a difference between being strong and being silent. Strength means you know what you need, and you find a way to stand behind it. Silence just means nobody ever has to reckon with you. When I finally reckoned with myself, sitting at that kitchen table on a Sunday evening with a folder in front of me and a decision already made, I wasn't angry. I was just clear. And clarity, I've learned, is what self-respect actually feels like from the inside. It doesn't roar. It doesn't demand. It just says, quietly and without apology, this is where I stop. The part that surprised me most wasn't the divorce, or the legal process, or even Diane's tears. It was the morning after she moved out, standing at my kitchen window with Chester asleep behind me, watching the light come up over the yard. The house felt like mine again. Not a resource. Not a utility. Mine. That's what I want for anyone sitting in the middle of a long silence they've mistaken for patience. Not revenge, not drama, just the feeling of being fully present in your own life. It's available to you. It was always available. You just have to stop making yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's indifference.